Hello and welcome to episode 162 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devon Dundee. I'm joined by my co-host, Sigmund Judge. Sigmund, we're starting this week with the announcement that we always know is coming around this time of year, but we still get very excited for. People try to predict exactly when it's going to be. Well, it happened today. We got WWDC dates. You want to tell us a little bit about when and what we can expect?
Absolutely. WWDC 25 is taking place June 9th through June 13th. The entirety of that week of events is going to be held online alongside, of course, a special in-person event at Apple Park for developers. Really, really exciting. I've been the last couple of years. This year, I'm going to be watching online like everyone else. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? To think that we are merely months away now from our first looks and I'd imagine our first hands-on with a new software release for Apple TV. I'm not saying tvOS 19 for certain. We'll save that for our predictions. But also visionOS 3 and, of course, everything new for all of the other platforms as well.
Yeah, I don't usually jump in on the betas immediately on announcement day for most of the platforms anyway. I try to hold off as long as I can, but I get the feeling this year with the rumors, I may have to jump in on day one. I know that I'm going to be able to resist, but I'm looking forward to watching it from home as well. And of course, we're a part of Mac Stories as of last year, and so hopefully getting to help with some of that coverage there. It's always a fun day in the Mac Stories newsroom as announcements are coming in and we're coordinating, who's doing what and getting all that out. So it's a different side of it that we get to experience, but we're looking forward to all of it. It's going to be so much fun to hear what Apple has in store for us over the coming year. Now, in the meantime, we are still, of course, living in tvOS 18 land right now. Most of us on tvOS 18.3.1, but of course, you, Sigmund, have been testing out tvOS 18.4 throughout its beta cycle. This week, we got the release candidate, so we kind of know what the finalized version is going to look like and what new features are in and maybe what's been taken out throughout the beta cycle. Can you give us just a preview of what we can expect when tvOS 18.4 comes out very, very soon?
Yeah, I'd imagine by the time we're talking next, it'll be available to the public, given that there's a release candidate, but sometimes there's a couple of release candidates until we really get to the finalized release candidate. It's funny how these things work out, but no doubt what we're going to see on the notes for this release are, stability and performance improvements. There's a little bit more to it. So, one thing that hasn't been mentioned on the podcast so far, which I've noticed, are audio improvements. And I promise you, it's not a placebo. I have tested an Apple TV running the older software and an Apple TV running the release candidates through my home theater. The new version coming definitely has an improvement in terms of the audio fidelity. I'm not sure if it's a change in Apple's audio compression pipeline, or it could just be a change to how the Apple TV is delivering that final signal to your speakers. But there's a marked improvement, and I'm very, very excited to see if that is just a hint of things to come. Powerbeats Pro 2 has accessibility options for one earbud alongside some other accessibility options for tables. Rotor options are for voice control and the speed and the cadence in which that feedback comes through. Then we have a peer-to-peer wireless option, which is an upcoming new option in AirPlay and HomeKit that can be toggled off so users consume less energy. Also introduced is the ability to turn on automatic background downloading of content for different third-party apps. The thing that's going to be front and center for a lot of people is the new rounded button designs across the TV app, more in line with the design stylings of visionOS, which we hope to see further implemented across tvOS at WWDC in June. And then on tvOS and iOS, further functionality to the featured top shelf previews across the Apple TV app and the different pages for the different channels as well, with the addition of info, an add to watch list button, and a next navigation button, which is really nice because rather than having to scroll, you just click in and you say next, right, what's the next thing, and you just go through that way. Nice and quick, really cool, really functional, great bit of design there. On top of that, for Apple Originals specifically, you'll also see an indication if a film or television series is a new release, or if it's an ongoing series, it will show you when the next episode is available. And all of that information syncs nicely with what you're watching in your queue. So that is very, very cool. And great addition. And who knows, maybe there's something I've missed. No doubt we'll find out next week.
Yeah, it's always fun seeing not only, of course, the big updates, but also in these point updates, what little tidbits and features come in. And, things like this metadata in the featured row, that's really helpful for Apple Originals and could potentially be something that third-party providers could plug into eventually and add their own data there, and just makes the TV app that much more useful on your big screen or your small screen or wherever it is you're watching. So, yeah, I love this, and I love that we get the time to cover these nitty-gritty details for our audience. We can look out for tvOS 18.4's public release very soon, but for this week's episode, we've got a lot coming up for you as well. We're going to recap the second season of Severance. I can't wait to dive into all of that with you, Sigmund, especially the finale. So many thoughts, so many conversations to be had. We're going to discuss the recent report of Apple TV Plus's financial losses, and if that's even the right word to describe the money that Apple's spending there. We'll get into that. But let's start with our long-awaited highlight of the studio. Sigmund, tell us about this one, because I know you can't wait to talk about it.
Oh, I've been chomping at the bit, Devon. Matt is the newly appointed head of a movie studio. Desperate for celebrity approval, he and his executive team at Continental Studios must juggle corporate demands with creative ambitions as they try to keep movies alive and relevant.
So, how do you feel in all this?
I got into this because I love movies. But now I have this fear that my job is to ruin them. It's just so much harder than I thought it was going to be.
You're talentless, spineless.
Why do you keep lying?
What is wrong with you?
I'm here to save your career.
You'll make a great studio head.
Starring, written and directed by Seth Rogen, created by Peter Hayek, Alex Gregory, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, alongside Frida Perez. This series also stars Catherine O'Hara, Catherine Hahn, Ike Barinholtz and Chase Sweet Wonders as season regulars, with guest star appearances coming from Bryan Cranston, Kayla Monterosso-Mayer and Dwayne Perkins, alongside many others, most of which we're not going to spoil in this conversation because this is part of the absolute joy that I've had watching this, and it's been a privilege to be able to watch this as many times as I have. I think I may have mentioned this before, 4 or 5. Wow. And I know you finally got round to watching the first 2 premiere episodes this week. I remember you saying how you felt during the first, and I said, I need you to have seen the second episode before we start talking on this podcast. And, I think you have.
I have. I've seen the first 2, both of which are available to our listeners today. And I just have to say, I highly recommend checking out these first 2 episodes. It's hard to live up to the hype that you've been giving for this show, Sigmund, because I know you're such a huge fan of it. But it truly does live up to that. Not only your hype, but also all the great reviews that it's getting from critics right now. This show is getting a ton of love, and it's all completely well-deserved. And I think that starts with the fact that the show is just truly laugh-out-loud funny. It's a pure comedy in a way that sometimes I think Apple Original comedies can veer into different genres, or they try to be more than a comedy. I mean, you think about something like Ted Lasso, it's funny, but the thing that people love about it more is that it's touching, which is great. But this show, I mean, I just watched it and just laughed for 45 minutes, right? And That's refreshing. Just get to enjoy that pure comedy and kind of the cringe of it. I think that's part of it too. And that's a genre of comedy that really connects with me. And of course, the whole premise of it is that it's rooted in Hollywood, the behind the scenes of this studio. And the other thing about this show that I think works so well is that it's obviously based on Rogan and the rest of the team's real life experiences in Hollywood.
Yep.
So that comedy comes from a place of truth. And so it feels like outlandish parody as you're watching it, but then you get finished watching it and you think, well, is it really that outlandish compared to some of the stories that have come out of Hollywood? Just from the outside looking in, I can't even imagine being on the inside, just the experiences that these people are pulling from to create these stories. And so it's hilarious, it's cringy, but it also is rooted in, not necessarily true stories, but true enough stories, I think, probably experiences that these people are having, that it comes off with an authenticity that I think also really makes it enjoyable to watch as well.
And I think that's one of the things about this, right, is the authenticity. Because there's one comedy that, honestly, when it ended last year, I was incredibly saddened, and that was Curb Your Enthusiasm on Max, and previously, a HBO original. And Larry David, comedic genius, but what he did really well was he blurred that line between the kind of the inner circles of Hollywood and his life, and he got himself in these frantic and chaotic situations that only he could. And there is a little bit of a similarity between Larry Jacobson and Matt Remick, except Matt Remick, who's the studio head played by Seth Rogen, and the new studio head, right? He's very, very positive. He's a lover of film. He wants to, be buddies with the talent on both sides of the camera. And he's not really particularly taken too seriously at the point in which we're introduced to him early on in this first episode. I think it's because he is very kind of wet behind the ears, right? He wants to do everything the right way. And yeah, everyone around him has had enough experience to know that things don't work this way. And at some point, Matt is going to let his guard down, and his inhibitions to do the right thing are going to be taken over by other influences. And that's the kind of crazy thing about this first episode. I know you've not seen it, but it reminded me a lot of, first off, the film The Player from 1992, Tim Robbins as this studio head. Fantastic film. But also, you've got the continuous drum roll in the background that's getting faster and frenzied, almost a mix between Whiplash and Birdman, and maybe, for those that know, Uncut Gems with Adam Sandler. Incredibly stressful, but yet so hilariously chaotic and funny.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there. The other element to this show that really stuck out to me, and this is what I texted you immediately after watching it, was it really, really stressed me out the first episode. The pace of it, those drums underneath, I got a little bit of like Fargo kind of vibe from that. Yeah. And kind of gave me that feeling, but like heightened to the point that like it's just never ending for Matt, right? He takes on this new job that he's so excited about, but he's immediately thrown into this world where he's pulled between the creative and the financial, and he really wants to lean one way, but he's being pulled constantly in the other direction. And so I watched this, again, just like the Metallica concert. I watched it before bed, which was a terrible idea. I've got to stop doing that. I've got to find better times to watch these things. But I was so anxious after watching it that I had to take some time to wind down. And I don't say that in a negative way. I think it's actually good to experience kind of those things on screen when something is effective enough to impact you in that way. I think that can actually be healthy and a part of the experience. But it is also fun you mentioned some of those homages that the show makes to classic Hollywood. And I love the opening credits of the show, with kind of that blurred orange background, almost like the Technicolor Looney Tunes kind of intro type. I loved that in the opening credits. I thought that whole thing was just a great little nod to what the show is, set your expectations. And then the whole visual style, it's this grainy film look, and it just very much has that kind of classic feel to it. It just gives you a little bit of nostalgia, I think, just when you turn it on immediately. It puts you in that mindset of classic Hollywood. And then, of course, the whole show is taking place on film sets, so you're constantly seeing the behind the scenes of films and the camera setups and, riding in the go-kart on the studio, which is always a fun element to include on screen. And yeah, I think the whole thing, it's fun, but it's also stressful. And for movie lovers like you and me, it's just the perfect place to spend some time and get to know these people and these characters.
Let's talk about some of the characters here. Of course, Matt Remick, very well-meaning, but he is in this competitive landscape, right? And even his best buds and the people that he worked with, it looks like they've got an edge to them where they're ready to stab him in the back as well. The great Ike Barinholtz, who I think this is the best I've ever seen him. He is absolutely amazing in this. Matt Remick's almost right-hand man, but also competing with a young upstart brought to the screen by Chase We Wonders, who is outstanding in this. And it leads to a great episode between the two later on in the season. Catherine Hahn as the marketing exec, who's very bullshit and just out of this world. And then, of course, you have Catherine O'Hara, who plays Matt Remick's once mentor, whose job he ends up replacing, right? And there's this very come to Jesus moment when he realizes how much trouble he's in following a meeting where he's given the job of studio head by Griffin Mill. And no, not Griffin Mill from The Player, but Griffin Mill played by Bryan Cranston, who is this exuberant but incredibly bolshy studio owner. And he explains very quickly, they're not looking into making prestige films. They're into making movies. And this is where, in the first episode, Matt finds himself in between two places, right? Someone that finally has the chance to work with some of the greatest filmmakers and auteurs of his time, and yet he's being pushed in a way where he's to make these films that really represent nothing but advertising, zero substance, but a great deal of profit for the studio. In terms of the first couple of episodes, they have a number of standout guest appearances. This first episode, Steve Buscemi, Martin Scorsese in one of the biggest roles, and apparently they just messaged his manager, said, hey, this is the role, this is what we want to do, and he just turned up to set and did it. And did it better than anyone else that could have. So that is pretty incredible. But then the second episode, which is one of my favorites of the season, has a guest role from Sarah Polley alongside Greta Lee. It's called The Oner. Do you want to give us a feel for, I think, honestly, technically, possibly one of the best TV episodes I've seen, and that's saying something following Severance last week.
Yeah, that is saying something, but I can't disagree with you. The Oner, it's a lot like the promotion in the sense that it is very high stress, but it kind of plays out in a different way for Matt. He's not being put under pressure from outside forces. He kind of is the pressure that he's exerting on other people, and he's entering a situation that he's not wanted in and refuses to leave. And it plays out as a Oner itself, but he's showing up to set and they're getting ready to film this one-shot scene to finish this film. They're on the last day of filming. They're running out of light. This really is like a make or break moment for this pivotal, very complex scene that they're trying to pull off. And then the studio head shows up because he just wants to sit in and maybe offer a couple notes, right? Terrible idea. And I think he learns that very quickly. But as it all goes awry, it's just very cool to see on a technical level the way, of course, wonders are made. It's very meta in the sense that it's about that, but it's also being played out in that sense. And then there's some jokes in the middle about how wonders are made or can be faked, using whips and stitching to kind of bring it together and make it look like it's one shot. So there's this very self-referential humor to it as well, and I think it works impeccably. So these two episodes, I think, pair very well together. They're stressful in different ways, but you really get to know these characters, exactly who they are, and you get to see them. They're not caricatures, but they are very heightened people, and you get to see their conversations go from just totally normal chats to like 130% just screaming at each other, and then right back down to normal conversations and niceties. It really is such a cool show. Great 2-episode debut, and I highly recommend people check it out.
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about this show is every episode is very much a self-contained story up until the 2-part finale. And I mean, there are even elements in which, you know, we take a little bit of time outside of that world and go with Matt Remick to a party in a completely different world that he's not used to, and how he deals with that. And it's one of my favorite episodes from this season, and I hope we see many, many more seasons to come at the studio. I will be talking about this, Devon, every week because every episode is just absolutely stunning. One thing I will say, though, as much as we enjoy, you know, the self-referential element of this show and, you know, the detailed minutiae of Hollywood and filmmaking, as we talk about this every week from an Apple perspective, there's going to be, I think, some people that watch the first episode, find it to be quite stressful, find it in some elements to be a little bit foul in terms of the language being used, and maybe put off. This is definitely not a show that I think is universal. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the audience reaction is as opposed to the critics' reaction, which has been, you know, otherworldly, really, in terms of praise. So just a forewarning there. But of course, the first 2 episodes of The Studio now streaming across all of your screens on Apple TV+. Now, talking of the different details and minutiae of Hollywood from an Apple perspective, there was a story this week from Wayne Marr at The Information reporting that Apple TV+ loses the company upwards of $1 billion per year. And if true, that detail makes Apple TV Plus the company's only subscription service that isn't profitable, with more than $5 billion spent per year on content, and a recent push from executives to pull back on spending by about $500 million, including cutting private jet transportation for stars, which is a thing that happens. But let's get into the details a little bit of this. And first off, what were your reactions to the news without, I'd say, a lot of context supporting it and really kind of telling the story of the industry as a whole right now?
Yeah, I wasn't really surprised by the news, to be honest, reading that number, and I thought it seemed to make sense to me given what we know about Apple TV Plus and the spending and where the subscribers are now and what's happening in the industry. To me, what was more surprising was the reaction to the story and how it felt like, for a lot of people, this was confirmation that Apple TV Plus is a dumpster fire, or, you know, it's like kind of pointless that Apple's doing this. And those might be the most extreme kind of reactions to it. But just this confirmation that, yeah, Apple's wasting money on Apple TV Plus, maybe is the best way to put it. That surprised me. Maybe that's due to a lack of understanding of what's happening in streaming right now and how most streamers aren't really making money at this point. And also maybe a lack of understanding of what Apple's exact goals are with Apple TV Plus. And I think diving deeper into those aspects of it, and in addition to Apple's relationship with Hollywood, I think that number makes more sense than it does maybe from the headline. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And very much how I felt about this. So let's get into some of the details on this. Latest subscriber numbers reported, because they're not confirmed, 45 million as of last year. Now, in recent times, we've heard of sign-ups going, 2 million per month at the end of last year, boosted by Amazon Channels integration, of course, the success of Severance and the marketing campaign behind that, alongside the finale of Silo, which of course helped drive 5.8 million US signups in January and February alone, which is incredible. Then we got a bit of an unidentified Apple source telling Matt Bellamy at the Park that subscriber numbers are higher due to the US-centered nature of research firms. The report claimed also that Apple shows constitute less than 1% of total US streaming service viewing. But then in June of last year, we heard from Just Watch, who reported Apple TV Plus accounted for 9% market share compared to Disney's 11%, actually overtaking Paramount Plus. And I don't know, I'm a little bit confused. Are people getting their wires crossed? And actually, how important is this 1 billion loss based on some of the other news in this report?
Yeah, it's tough because the streamers don't release numbers, so it's not like the days of the Nielsen charts for TV where it's all very objective and you can tell based on the reports what exactly is happening. So we talk about 1% viewing, maybe that's the time spent, whereas the market share could be total subscriptions or something of that nature. And of course, it's really hard to even compare shows between streaming services because a show with 7 seasons compared to a show with 1 season might rack up millions of more minutes viewed. And it's all just kind of a mess right now. There's no standardization or openness with the data. So yeah, we do get kind of conflicting reports here. And depending on what point you're trying to make, you can find a factoid, I think, that fits what you want it to say. But money doesn't lie, right? I mean, there are like facts and figures on a sheet. Apple executives somewhere, way up the chain, have access to, this is what we spent on Apple TV Plus this year. This is what we estimate we made on it, including parts of the Apple One bundle and those 3-month subscriptions that come with Apple hardware purchases, and splitting out annual subscriptions across 12 months, and all that they have to do to account these numbers. They come up with this minus this equals here's what we lost, and it's about $1 billion. And so, I think that makes a lot of sense. The people analyzing these things are making their best guesses based on the information they have, but I think that sounds like a ballpark number that doesn't sound outlandish to me. And so, despite any other numbers, or we talk about number of subscribers and market share and all that, and it's worth trying to track those things and make a full picture that makes sense. At the end of the day, we've got this $1 billion number, and that's really what people are talking about. Now, this whole report was kind of generally negative on Apple services as a whole. It put particular emphasis on Apple TV Plus losses because it's the one that's not profitable, but it also claims that services are artificially bolstered by the Apple One bundle that many subscribers choose mainly for iCloud Plus storage. And so there's this sense that, Apple Arcade, Apple News Plus, Apple Fitness Plus are all kind of getting a leg up because iCloud Plus is so necessary. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing myself. I mean, I think the bundle has a lot of value to it. I think Apple was wise to bundle those things together because it gets people to discover those services. Personally, I use all of them all the time, and I get a lot of value out of them. So I personally think that even if iCloud Plus is the entry point, there's so much value to those other services that it's worth going for the bundle, and that's why people go for it.
I mean, before Apple One was available, I bought my iCloud storage by itself, right? So I can't see iCloud subscribers just jump into Apple One because of iCloud Plus. There's obviously more value in the Apple One bundle, and then, it's shared across family members as well. And that's also interesting in the sense that, Apple TV Plus subscriptions. If we're talking about paid subscribers, fine, but are we then conflating that to one paid subscriber is not 5 family sharers that are watching together? And what does that mean for minutes watched as well? I think there's a lot of detail that you can kind of switch to however you want to. And that's why, in some ways, this report, I found it hard to decide what was commentary and what was actually factual reporting based on the knowledge that had been shared with them. I presume there's a bit of a mismatch of the two. And as well, very little with regard to international habits because of the US-centric nature of the reporting. And that's also something I would take into consideration given that this is a global endeavor. There's also some strange re-reporting happening with very little said about the initial business plan, reportedly predicting losses of between 15 billion and 20 billion over its first decade. Something I wanted to get into because reality is Apple TV Plus started at the end of 2019. So if we take into consideration the money that was already being outlaid for the shows that were already into production, let's call it 2019, there was $1 billion loss, and there was $1 billion loss every year up until 2024, which was only 500 million. So really it's 5.5 billion lost so far. We're halfway through that decade of predictions, which they'd already accounted for privately in the business plan of between 15 billion and 20 billion. So does that just mean that we're seeing a slow ratcheting up of production and therefore outlay, and this is part of the strategy?
I think anyone who started a streaming service in 2019 knew they were going to lose money for a long time over it. That is the play, right? Streaming is a loss leader currently for a lot of companies, and it definitely was in 2019. So, yeah, I think you would have been unwise to start a streaming service at that time and not expect to lose, $1 billion a year. Again, to me, doesn't sound like a huge loss for a company at Apple's size trying to create a streaming service. And so if that was the plan all along, to lose 15 to 20 billion over the first 10 years, and they're actually behind schedule there in terms of how much they would be losing at this point. And so we're looking at this from the outside as this seems like a huge problem. They're losing money, whereas this very well could have been the plan all along, because you have to invest and lose that money over time to get to a place where the library is to a point, the subscriber base is to a point, and of course, price increases over time are also a factor in that as well, where you eventually do start turning a profit, and then over the next 10 years or so, you make back what you lost and then some, and then you're in the black and you're making money. That's kind of the way that it has to work to get this kind of thing off the ground, and it seems like that's exactly what's happening here. It doesn't seem like it's an outlier from that plan in any way.
And, no TV series or films have disappeared from the service yet as a tax write-off, unlike a lot of competitors within this streaming world, which I would call cheating in a sense, both your audience and the creative people involved as well. I want to just very quickly make a comparison to the competition in terms of spending, because I think that gives us an idea as to where everyone is. Then you have to keep in mind when a lot of these services launched and what they had behind them already in terms of IP and in terms of back catalogue. So Apple, this year they're expected to spend 7.5 billion on content per a analyst called Moffett-Nathanson. That's up a little bit from 7.3 billion which was spent in 2024. Prime Video, who I'd say are probably the most similar to Apple, because Prime Video, of course, is packaged in with their service of deliveries. They're kind of similar, but they're spending 9.1 billion this year and spent 9.3 billion last year. Paramount Global, they've just been overtaken by Apple last year with regard to their streaming services. But the company as a whole spent 16.4 billion last year and are expected to spend 15.2 billion this year. And they have about the same amount of share in the streaming wars, as we'll call it. Netflix, of course, the ones that kicked it all off, 16.2 billion was spent in 2024, expected to rise to 18.6 billion in 2025. Warner Brothers expected to spend 19.5 billion this year, and Disney Plus is an interesting one because Disney actually report their financials as a whole unit. So Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN Plus. They are now, as of Q3 2024, they are now in profit. But all the time leading up, and they launched in 2019 with a massive back catalogue, all of the IP you could expect from Star Wars and Marvel, they were reporting losses of $11 billion. And that to me is pretty interesting. We can make comparisons and there will be fine minutiae details in which some of it doesn't make sense and you can't make a full articulated argument for who's doing better because of this or that. But I thought it was interesting that Disney for a long time were actually probably making more money out of the churros that they sold at their resorts than they were through streaming. Streaming for anyone, whether it's Apple or Disney or Netflix, is a long play game.
It really is. And I think one thing we've seen a lot of streamers do recently, maybe Netflix is the one that bucks this trend, but are pulling back a little bit on the original content spending. We've seen Disney do this. Some projects that got announced are not going forward or they're being moved to theatrical. We saw Moana 2, which was supposed to be a Disney Plus series, get turned into a film, released theatrically, did well. But we've seen these shifts in the spending, whereas Apple is also pulling back some and adjusting, especially on the theatrical front. But those changes don't have to be quite as drastic because the spending wasn't quite to that same level to start off with. So, yeah, it's very interesting to see these comparisons between Apple and the rest of the streaming world. Of course, Amazon being the closest in terms of the game that they're playing. But Apple's playing in this world, so it's fair to kind of look at those numbers, how they compare. And again, that $1 billion a year, not looking so bad when you look at how some of the other streamers have done in the past and their path to profitability. And if you look at how Netflix and Disney Plus have moved towards profitability, we can see that there's probably a path forward there for Apple TV Plus as well. The other thing to keep in mind is Apple TV Plus exists within Apple as a whole. A company that makes the iPhone, which is a huge business on its own, AirPods, gigantic business. I mean, all these different segments of the company can help bolster a streaming service as it's getting off the ground. And so there's no real risk to the business's overall health to be losing $1 billion on the streaming service as it moves towards profitability. Apple has talked in the past about becoming net cash neutral. We all know Apple is sitting on a huge pile of money. They make tons of profits, and I don't know there's any possible way a company could spend that much money that quickly as it's bringing it in. Apple does buybacks for their stocks. They do dividends to stockholders, and they're continuing to look at ways to reduce the pile of money that they're sitting on because, using that money is better than just sitting on it. And so this is one way that they're using it. And so, again, $1 billion a year, it's a ton of money. But when you're looking at what Apple's sitting on and the desire to become cash neutral, it makes sense to invest that money to, yes, lose it for now, but eventually, hopefully turn that into a business that will be bringing money back in. So they can afford to do that because of the health of the rest of the business, the Macs and the iPhones and the iPads and everything else. And Apple TV Plus doesn't have to be bringing in money for quite some time. Of course, they're going to be smart with how they're spending it. They're going to pull back some when it seems like it's going too far. But the pressure is not on it the way it is for a company like Disney or Netflix, where that's kind of their whole game.
I also think, and I think this probably goes for Amazon as well, and it definitely went for Netflix initially. I mean, Netflix, even today, their lack of Academy Award for Best Picture has got something to do with their relationship with the Academy and how Netflix are portrayed to have changed the industry. Both Amazon and Apple, I think, are playing a cautious game as well. There's already been a lot of uprooting in the industry of, you know, how things were traditionally and how things are going now. And so for those wondering, well, why aren't Apple spending the amount that Paramount are or the amount that Netflix are, and why aren't Amazon? I think that's a good reason. I think they are still at the point in which they're developing and building relationships within the industry, along with trust. You know, when we've talked about this, when we covered it in the early days, and I say the early days, we're only 5 years in, but, you know, probably 18 months into the service, we were still having reports of really a lack of trust from creatives, and there was a lot of caution, I would say, in the air with regard to Apple coming into this space. And I think, especially with, you know, Severance is a great example, I think. We all wondered why 350 million would have been spent on what is an office drama mainly based in an office. And you can see why once we hear about all of the fine behind the scenes details of how long something took to make, how many people it took to make it, and then you hear of new names, you know, coming out of these productions, like the cinematographer and director of photography for the series, Jessica Lee Gagner. You kind of understand what Apple are at least trying to do. I mean, you know, Servant was another good example where they were bringing in young filmmakers and making it a collaborative experience. And so I think Apple are doing what they set out to do.
In terms of moving forward and like how this information could impact Apple's strategy, I honestly feel like they've already made the adjustments that they need to. Mm-hmm. And are kind of going to carry on. You know, they're going to control the spending, as we've read about before. I think maybe the most interesting detail to me about the report was the private jet spending. You know, I mean, you got to recruit these stars somehow, and maybe that was a perk that was being thrown into the contracts that they're like, can we get this cost down a little bit? You know, that makes sense. But I think Apple's going to continue investing selectively. I don't think they're dabbling. I think they're being selective in terms of what they're investing in on the path to profitability, just like the rest of the streaming industry, and moving things in that direction. But I think the main impetus for Apple TV Plus has and always will be sharing stories that matter. And they're going to continue to do that, to rack up awards, to gain causative favor for the company and its services division. And at $1 billion a year, I think that's probably a price they're going to be willing to pay as long as they need to.
I also note that, you know, in that report, no mention really about Apple Vision Pro and the immersive aspects of storytelling that would have been folded into this number. No real mention of Friday Night Baseball, which returns this week, MLS, and what could be coming in the future. I think in terms of live sports, we talked previously about, you know, when NFL rights were up for debate, that Apple went in for those, but they wanted the immersive video rights as well rolled into it, and that's where discussions fell apart. And well, there's some good news about that. Atem, I hope I'm saying that correctly. They're the global leader in video compression, delivery, and streaming solutions, alongside Focal Point VR, who are a world leader in immersive telepresence, have announced this week a groundbreaking innovation, the first ever live 8K spatial computing workflow for Apple Vision Pro. This is a breakthrough that's going to enable live immersive experiences that match the headset's 37 pixels per degree fidelity, a feat previously only possible in post-production. And the breakthrough is powered by Focal Point VR's quad 3D 8K panoramic camera system, which no doubt, Devon, I will not be able to afford, and Atom's Titan encoder, which processes and streams high-resolution stereoscopic video directly in Apple's MV-HEVC format for the very first time. So this is another layer to this story that I feel has been missed, probably because of the low install base at this point in time. But in all of the time that we've been covering Apple TV, even, going all the way back to the introduction of tvOS and how that was going to work for live sports, it took almost a decade from that announcement to get to that point. So, this is another element within this conversation that I just wanted to explore very quickly.
Yeah, I think it's worth keeping in mind that Apple, while they're continuing to invest in Apple TV Plus as it currently stands, are also thinking about the future and future kinds of entertainment and what that's going to look like. And this is a really exciting advancement in the sense that we've talked about often that the limitations for live immersive streaming are out there. You've got bandwidth, you've got processing, you've got just having the right hardware to do it. It seems like these companies coming together have come up with a solution that could potentially enable that in the future. And so it's great to see other companies investing in this technology and trying to get it out there. And now I just can't wait to see them set up a rig at an NBA game or NFL or wherever they want to set it up. Let's get some tests going on Apple Vision Pro. I'd love to watch some immersive sports and then see how that could also affect, immersive theater and concerts and all these other things going forward. The more people we have working on this, the more people we have enjoying it and getting to know the technology, improving it, and getting to a point where it's as easy as hitting the play button in an app. That's what we want to see, and I'm really excited about it.
Now, one element last week in our immersive chat about Apple Immersive Metallica was the audio. And before we got to immersive video, we of course had immersive spatial audio introduced with AirPods. Well, we got some AirPods news this week, not of new hardware, but a new feature coming to hardware that released just last year.
That's right. This week, Apple announced that a software update for AirPods Max with USB-C, the version that came out last year with the new port, will enable lossless and low latency audio next month, assumably with iOS 18.4. These features will be supported over the company's new 3.5mm to USB-C cable, as well as the USB-C cable that comes with the headphones. Over 100 million songs are currently available on Apple Music in 24-bit, 48 kHz lossless audio, and the new lossless capability will enable musicians to produce tracks in personalized spatial audio with head tracking as well. The company claims that the new lowered latency puts AirPods Max on par with the speakers built into iPhones, iPads, and Macs, which will particularly benefit video game players and streamers. So I'm not someone who's particularly sensitive to audio quality and latency. If it's really bad, I'm going to notice it, but I don't have the golden ear, as they say. But I think that for people who are especially working in this industry or trying to break into it, video production, music production, video game streaming, it's great that these really, really high quality capabilities are coming to Apple's headphones, and they're not cheap headphones, but they're not, thousands and thousands of dollars like audio equipment can get. And so bringing these capabilities down to headphones that you can just go into your local Apple store and pick up and, get the cable as well. You're going to need that cable, and it's finally here. But yeah, I think this is a cool addition. My only addition to this news, I think, is that I wish these capabilities had been ready when they announced the device so that it could have set itself apart from the previous generation.
Yeah, my thoughts exactly. The thing that kind of upsets me still are the color choices of AirPods Max. And I think actually the USB-C to 3.5mm cable only comes in white right now, which is a bit of a surprise and a bit of a head turner. Maybe, falling in line with the white cable of the old AirPods ads that we got back in the day. One thing that I think is really cool and I'm hopeful for from an Apple TV perspective is we see further lossless implementation when it comes to movies and TV shows, and who knows what could be in the offing in the future. In terms of app news this week, some Plex updates. Now, I know I've been talking about my Plex server. I don't think you've gone down that route just yet, but there's a reason why you may want to reconsider within the next month, let's say. Plex have made a number of announcements in this one press release. A lot of changes happening. Of course, Plex, a personal media server, which then got enhanced with deep linking to other services. It's trying to do more and become more to more people. Price increases to the Plex Pass as of April 29th to include monthly $6.99, yearly $69.99, and the lifetime Plex Pass, which I got last year for $120, I think it was. It's now going to be $249.99. Well, there's good reasons. Plex are trying to do a lot more. They're trying to become more for more people. But they're also bringing in some additional features that I think are really worthy. There's a valuable integration for parents with Common Sense Media featuring extras for Plex Pass holders. There's a new bespoke server management app in the works that works on browsers or mobile clients for a better curation experience with more visibility into who is on your server and how they're connecting. There's also, and this is very, very cool, an open and documented API for server integrations, along with the ability to create custom metadata agents. So, Sofa sequel, good looking out for you. But also, there's quite the change for streaming personal media outside of your network. Beginning on April 29th, users will be able to stream from personal libraries on a remote network in one of two ways. Option 1 is remote playback with a Plex Pass, where people streaming personal media from a Plex Pass holder's account can stream for free. Very, very cool. And that includes those that already have a lifetime Plex Pass. Option 2, however, is interesting. It's remote playback with a remote watch pass subscription, which allows individual users to remotely stream media from any personal media server to which they have access. For users who don't run their own server and are looking to stream from a server belonging to a friend or a family member who does not have a Plex Pass, it's $1.99 a month or $19.99 a year. And the other cool thing, if you've ever tried Plex and maybe it's something that you just dipped into and then suddenly you didn't have access to the pass, and well, you paid the unlock fee to be able to watch more than a minute from a personal media server on your iOS device. That unlock fee is being removed permanently, and that change is going to take place once the new Plex experience becomes available to the general public. We talked about the experience before. I talked about how controversial it is in so many ways in terms of the layout, but overall I think this makes things a lot more accessible, if not a lot more expensive if you're looking at a lifetime pass, because it's going up over double what it currently is. So yeah, if you've ever thought about hosting your own media, whether that's films or TV shows, or maybe it's family photos and videos that you want to be able to share with people that aren't on your Apple family plan, right? And you're not sharing through iCloud Photos, or maybe you want to share with people outside of the Apple ecosystem whilst not uploading your personal photos and videos to social media companies who God knows what they're going to do with them. This is a really cool option. So yeah, Plex, lots of changes, and we will follow up and report and see how things are going.
This Monday, Max is releasing an American Sign Language version of its hit series The Last of Us, with plans to release ASL versions day and date with new episodes of the show's second season starting next month. Max is a service that we've seen get into the ASL game with Barbie and other select titles, but I think seeing it come to such a popular series like The Last of Us, not only for its previous season so people can catch up, but day and date with the second season so people can just watch along as it's rolling out and everyone else is also talking about it. I really think that's incredible and so cool to see. It's something we've mentioned several times on the show about such a huge accessibility win when services and platforms choose to implement this, and it's really cool to see it rolled out in this way.
Yeah, I mean, we see the ASL versions for Apple's keynote and State of the Union at WWDC, and no doubt the idea probably came from them. But Warner Discovery have run with it, and for all of the poking and prodding we do with that service, this is just outstanding work. Again, fast becoming one of my favourite services after all of the moaning about Atmos, which I will continue to do. Yeah, this is a great inclusion. Now, in terms of Apple Music, their catalogue is now available to be used by DJs thanks to integrations with leading DJ tools including Alpha Theta, Sirota, Engine DJ, Denon DJ, Numark, Rain DJ, and DJ Pro from Algorithm. The service also now includes a DJ with Apple Music section showcasing DJ-friendly playlists and sample mixes. And I'm going to say this, as someone that used to DJ once a fortnight before lockdown, I had to use Spotify in conjunction with Apple Music because I was using DJ software, and then Spotify dropped their support for DJs due to licensing issues and whatnot. So Apple now getting into this space, it's a great step up for them and a great differentiator given up by its competitors. So very cool.
Yep, this is cool to see. This is not my world, but I have to imagine it was a lot of work to get the rights and all the integrations for this. So it's great to see Apple continuing to invest in the music world in this new way with DJs. In a whole other vein, Apple Music Classical was updated this week with a trio of new features for classical music fans. It includes time sync listening guides for more than 100 works that provide details of what you're listening to in real time, editor-created stations arranged by instrument, composer, period, and genre, and personalized recommendations in the Home tab based on your listening history. So it's cool to see Apple continue to invest in Apple Music Classical, and it's an app that if you're a fan of that genre of music, if you're someone who's spending a lot of time in there, I think these changes are going to really be great for your experience, offer you ways to listen to things without having to necessarily pick every single thing that you listen to, and for those times when you really want to focus and learn more about a piece of work, now you've got these time sync guides where you can just dive in and be completely immersed with the music and the details about it for the period of listening to it. Very, very cool.
Yeah, good couple of weeks for Apple Music Classical listeners. And I'm going to put it out there, Devon. Next week, we're going to hear about an Apple Fitness integration where you get points for gesticulating like the conductors do to the music. It's a new workout, exclusive. No, not really. We did do a fair bit of gesticulating when it came to one specific trailer this week for upcoming French language drama Carême. An ambitious young chef uses his seductive charm to work as a spy so he can save his father and make his name. Now, Devon, I'm calling this one Food and Frolics. This is the subtitle title for us. what else was anyone supposed to do, really, during Napoleon's reign? This is a very, very French language series based on the book Cooking for Kings by Ian Kelly. It's created by Ian Kelly and Davide Serino, directed by Martin Bourboulon, and starring Benjamin Voisin, Jeremy Renier, Lina Kuduri, and Alice Deleuze. I'm really sorry for butchering those names, but Devon. This got us quite hot under the collar.
Yeah, this one, it looks exciting. It looks like a mix, I'd say, between Elvis, Franklin, and Drops of God. And if that sounds like an odd combination, it is. But it really seems to work in this trailer. You've got this almost Austin Butler type, I would say, leading man, very suave-looking young man who is clearly talented, not in the world of music, but actually in the world of food. I think that's where you kind of get the Drops of God element. There's these beautiful kind of pieces of food artwork, I would say, that he's putting together and, of course, revolutionizing that whole world during this period, becoming the first world-famous celebrity chef. And so it's cool to see the innovations that he's making there, or at least hints of it. I think I'm going to be very hungry after watching episodes of this series. And it's also a period piece set in France, so you're getting all those elements as well, and all of that looks really well done in this sense. So I think this is going to be an exciting one. We don't get a ton of information about the plot or, exactly what's going on here, but we know there's food. We know there's a good-looking guy who knows he's good-looking and uses that to his advantage, and then he's going to be tied in with some kind of spy network and using his skills in that sense as well. So an intriguing premise, of course, based on a true story, and I'm looking forward to it.
And I've got a funny feeling through that description you covered your eyes for the majority of the trailer, because it was very, very hot and steamy. I would almost say also, lots of food play, interesting. Even the drizzle on the eggs was kind of, gooey, had certain connotations. The chaos, the carnage, the food and frolics. Carême debuts globally on Wednesday, April 30th, with its first 2 episodes on Apple TV+.
Looking a little bit further ahead to the beginning of this summer's movie season, we don't have an exact date, but we're expecting upcoming Apple original film Fountain of Youth to make its streaming debut at the beginning of the summer's movie season. Representing Guy Ritchie's return to the high genre, the upcoming film is an original work penned by Amazing Spider-Man and Scream reboot screenwriter James Vanderbilt. With critics privately remarking that it's full of fun, thrills, and biting wit, the film stars John Krasinski, Stanley Tucci, Three-Body Problem star Isaac Gonzalez, as well as Star Wars cast member Domhnall Gleeson. It's now listed in the TV app ahead of an official date and debut trailer, so go ahead and add it to up next so you get all those details as soon as they come out.
Also available in the TV app to add to your watch list is Echo Valley, starring Julianne Moore and Sydney Sweeney, and it's going to make its Apple TV Plus global streaming debut on June 13th. It stars Julianne Moore as Kate, whose troubled daughter Claire, played by Sydney Sweeney, shows up on her doorstep covered in someone else's blood, and Kate must decide just how far she'll go to protect her child. It's directed by Australia's brilliant Beast and Encounter director Michael Pearce, written by Mayor of Easttown scribe Brad Inglesby, and available now in the TV app. You can also check out the first look images along with an interesting article. I think it's behind a paywall right now, but a fascinating article on this feature film in Vanity Fair this week.
In development news, we have a couple of really big acquisitions from Apple this week, starting with Apple Studios landing the rights to the next film from director Joseph Kosinski and producer Jerry Bruckheimer following this summer's F1. Written by Academy Award nominee Zach Balan, who wrote King Richard, the film is described as a thriller that will explore disclosure around UFOs. That's all we know about it, but I think that's all we really need to know, honestly, to get excited for it. It's cool to see this team reunite, and of course reuniting under the Apple Studios banner. It's very cool to see.
And Steven Spielberg has a UFO film coming out called Disclosure. So there's going to be some competition there, I think, and it's going to be interesting because there's so many different ways in which this subject can be explored. So, yeah, fascinating. Really, really looking forward to that. And I can only imagine some of the camera work that's going to go on there. The cameras that were devised for F1, Sony, I believe, have an announcement today as we're recording with regard to that smaller cine camera actually being available to other filmmakers. So very, very cool there. Apple has also landed the rights to drama series The Dealer from Media Res, starring Jessica Chastain and Adam Driver, one of my favourite actors. The show is described as a biting exploration of power, class, seduction, and culture set inside the glittering world of the high-end art market, told through the eyes of an aspiring super gallerist played by Jessica Chastain, and the tangled relationship with her most gifted and unnerving artist, played by Adam Driver. Great bit of casting there.
For sure. In casting news this week, we've already got our first bit of news for Ted Lasso Season 4, but it's actually more recasting news. Deadline reports that the Ted Lasso team is on the lookout for a new actor to play Ted's son Henry, described as a skilled 12-year-old soccer player. Gus Turner portrayed Henry throughout the show's first 3 seasons, and it's not totally clear why the role is being recast, but it could be an indication of a larger role for the character, possibly even some on-the-field action for Henry in the coming season. So while I'm sad to see Gus Turner go, he did a great job with Henry the first few seasons. I'm excited that we're going to get to potentially spend more time with him. Maybe he'll come over with Ted this time around and get to see him on the field as well. So we'll be interested to see who ends up playing that role in the 4th season, and we'll be keeping an eye out for news. Meanwhile, Chris Diamantopoulos of Silicon Valley fame has joined the cast of Dark Matter Season 2, which also sees Amanda Brugel promoted to series regular for her role as Blair. Led by Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Connelly, Dark Matter Season 2 production is currently underway in Chicago. Greg Kinnear has also joined the cast of Apple original series Margot's Got Money Troubles as the boyfriend of Michelle Pfeiffer's Cheyenne. The series stars Elle Fanning as Margot, Cheyenne's daughter, who borrows elements from her dad's wrestling career to find success on OnlyFans. And finally, the cast of Apple original sci-fi series Neuromancer continues to grow, with Dane DeHaan coming aboard this week to join previously announced stars Callum Turner, Brianna Middleton, Mark Strong, Joseph Lee, Clement Swessey, and Peter Sarsgaard.
So, lots and lots and lots in the pipeline. But we end on some other news, and that is from The Hollywood Reporter, with Aaron Couch reporting that Apple is in the running for the right to the Jason Bourne series, which is currently being shipped around by author Robert Ludlum's estate. Skydance and Netflix are also in the mix, as is Universal, the previous rights holder, which honestly I think is probably the best place for this franchise, just because I loved the Jason Bourne films that have already been, and I think they did a fantastic job with them. Jason Bourne was last seen, I can't believe I'm saying this because it makes me feel quite old actually, Devon, last seen on screen in 2016, having been portrayed by Matt Damon all the way back since 2002. So I think that's why that portrayal is very much burnt into my memory, and I can't imagine what could be coming next. But whoever does get it, I think they can do some really interesting things with this story.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that Apple's in the mix, but of course, lots of conversations happening there. We'll just have to see how exactly it goes. Now, while Severance remains at number 7 on the Nielsen Top 10 Streaming Originals chart, this week we find out that The Gorge came in at number 3 on the Top 10 Streaming Movies chart for the week of its release, with 362 million minutes viewed. I have to say, that is pretty incredible to me, Sigmund, for an Apple original film to come up that high on the Nielsen streaming chart. The Gorge, a film that we both enjoyed and had really nice things to say about when it came out. And of course, the data is a little bit delayed on, what the chart exactly looks like, but now we know it had a really good opening weekend. And apparently a lot of people agreed with us that The Gorge was worth checking out.
Yeah, and I'm still waiting patiently for the original soundtrack to become available on vinyl from, of course, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. But there is one soundtrack that I'm hearing is right upon us, and that is the soundtrack for Severance Season 2, releasing via Lakeshore Records. An official announcement for the vinyl and streaming release of Theodore Shapiro's score is expected soon, with art and package design once again coming from Made by Mutant, that being Greg Roof and Spencer Hickman. They did such a good job with the packages of both versions of the Season 1 vinyl soundtrack, and I'm chomping at the bit. I'm going to be first in line for that Season 2 soundtrack, which I don't know if you can really include it in the score, but the marching band procession from the finale, that is already my ringtone, Devon. But we'll get there.
Oh, that's awesome. We will get there indeed. But first, let's talk about this week's Apple TV releases. Today sees the premiere of this week's highlight, The Studio, alongside the premiere of Side Quest, the 4-part anthology spin-off of Mythic Quest, which we'll have more to say about next week. That comes alongside the finale of this season of Mythic Quest and a new episode of Berlin ER.
On Friday, we get the premiere of a 2-part documentary event, number 1 on the call sheet. And honestly, with so much going on in the world of Apple TV, I think this is going to fly under quite a few people's radars, but I really don't want it to. I checked this out, Devon, and it's amazing. Number 1 on the call sheet, of course, a reference to people being called first in terms of importance in a film's production or a TV show's production. And this really tells the story of and celebrates the talents on both sides of the camera, as well as the audiences who came out in droves to break new ground and extinguish the studio's fear that black men and women weren't box office draws. There's some really, really interesting insight from really an incredible array of talents throughout the industry, and their stories and their retelling of conversations that they had with people like Sidney Poitier and Little Richard, and it really is quite special. It personally reminded me of just how obsessed I was, and I forgot about this, but when I was, a little kid, I was, living in white suburbia, and yet who I was obsessed with when I was a kid was Eddie Murphy and his portrayal of Axel Foley in the Beverly Hills Cop films, at the same time being absolutely obsessed with Michael Jackson when it came to music. And there's a point in which everyone's talking about the studios, but not conflating the studio's opinions and attitudes with that of the audience. The audience were who proved the studios wrong and actually gave the stars that are talking in these documentaries new insight and hope and proof that the studios were wrong. And there's a really nice part in this where they do talk about the audience doing that, and I started to think about one of my first late night evening father and son action movie screenings, going to see Bad Boys at the cinema. I got to celebrate that whilst also understanding the struggle to get those stories to an audience at that point in time. And so this is a fantastic 2-part documentary event. I highly, highly recommend it. And I think for any film fan, it's going to really make you feel warm inside, because whilst there is that element of struggle, this is very much a celebration. It's undeniable. Fantastic stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I have not had a chance to check this one out, but it is on my list for this weekend. So I'm glad you got to watch it early and share that insight with us. Definitely add number 1 on the call sheet to your up next queue for this weekend's viewing. But that's not the only documentary coming to Apple TV Plus this weekend, amazingly, because on top of those 2 great documentaries, you've also got Fight for Glory 2024 World Series. So for the sports fans, especially the Dodgers fans who want to, celebrate last year's victory, this is an opportunity to get the behind-the-scenes story of how that all played out, and that'll be on Apple TV Plus this Friday as well, alongside new episodes of Surface, Dope Thief, and the return of Friday Night Baseball with the Baltimore Orioles at Toronto Blue Jays at 7 p.m. Eastern and the New York Mets at Houston Astros at 8 p.m. Eastern. So good opportunity to break out the multi-view and check out both games at the same time on Apple TV+.
And that's not your only opportunity, right? Because on Saturday and Sunday, we have MLS Game Day, including Sunday Night Soccer, available to everyone. And of course, every kick, every foul, every goal, and every chant available to MLS Season Pass subscribers. And if that wasn't enough, Devon, no, we're not getting to extras just yet, because we of course have a new episode of Big Time, the new Apple original podcast starring Steve Buscemi. I really enjoyed the very first episode of this. Really fun to just listen to over a coffee on Monday morning. I've not yet listened to the second episode just yet, but yeah, great way to kick off the week.
Yeah, it's just great to have an Apple Original podcast in my rotation again. I love those, and I'm happy to have them, and I hope they have some more stacked up to come after Big Time. But I'm happy this one also has the weekly rollout, even for Apple TV Plus subscribers. You get ahead one week, but you still have to wait each week. I think that's awesome. And yeah, I'm looking forward to starting my Monday with Big Time on Monday as well. For extras this week, we have from the studio, Seth Rogen reveals the cast. So if you want spoilers of all the people you can expect coming throughout the season, you can check out that short video. For Dope Thief, we have Brian Tyree Henry and Wagner Moura on their bromance. For The Gorge, another video with Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, this time called Targeted Questions. They must have done like 40 of these and just have them ready to go whenever people aren't talking about The Gorge enough. Just throw that out there. But you could tell they had so much fun putting these together, and I'll take all of them that I can get. For fans of Severance, if you want to learn more about the finale, which we're going to discuss here in just a moment, we've got Inside the Episode 210 Cold Harbor, and alongside the release of the Severance finale, Apple also released The Art of the Perfect Shot, featuring 52 perfect shots from Apple Originals. So check out that video as well.
Well, last week I stayed up ready for the Severance finale premiere. Watched it at 1 a.m. and could not sleep the rest of the evening. And wow, what a finale it was. Of course, if you've not yet seen the finale, I don't know how you've managed to dodge spoilers of the finale so far, but we are about to get into spoiler territory. So please don't ruin it for yourself. Come back at another point and we'll see you in the next chapter. For everyone else, we're about to take both our innies and outies on quite a ride. Mark Scout leads a team of Illumin Industries whose employees have undergone a severance procedure that surgically divides their memories between their work and personal lives. In Season 2, Mark and his friends learn the dire consequences of trifling with the severance barrier, leading them further down a path of woe.
So what did you guys see up there?
Milchick said we're famous.
All of us equally, or one of us is the star? My Audie's wife is Miss Casey.
I gotta get her out of here.
I'm tightening the leash.
There'll be no honeymoon ending for you.
Goodbye, Marcus.
Wait!
Well, Devon, the most watched series on Apple TV Plus, created, written, and executive produced by the genius Dan Erickson, directed and executive produced by Ben Stiller, with incredible work from cinematographer and director of photography Jessica Lee Gagner, starring Adam Scott, Britt Lauer, Tremel Tillman, Zach Cherry, Jen Tullock, Michael Chernus, Dyken Leichman, John Turturro, Christopher Walken, Patricia Arquette, and new series regulars Sarah Box and Oliver Dari Olafsson. Devon, honestly, my breath is still taken away from last Friday. So I'm going to hand over the reins to you. And, well, what did you think of this finale? And I guess we'll get there, but the season as a whole?
Oh, we have to talk about the finale first because I'm just dying to talk about it. I mean, there's been so many conversations going on, so many people thrilled, maybe by their predictions coming true, maybe by them being subverted, but either way, just absolutely thrilled and floored by this finale. Just as a quick summary of what happened, on the eve of completing his Cold Harbor file, Mark S. is recruited by Miss Cabell, Devon, and his own Audi to help Gemma escape Lumen's grasp. He completes the file with the help of Helly and Dylan. Mark S. evades Mr. Milchick and accesses the elevator to the testing floor, where his Audi is reunited with his wife. The two make their way to the severed floor, where their innies then run to the stairwell. Gemma is reawoken when she enters the stairwell, but Mark S. chooses to stay on the severed floor, grabbing Helly's hand and running away. And that's where we end season 2 of Severance. Now, of course, that summary doesn't even go into the incredible performance by Tremel Tillman with the marching band and his leading them in the merriment exercise, which was absolutely incredible. But that's kind of the overview of the plot anyway. And I have to say, this finale just blew me away. It was absolutely incredible. It's a very different finale from the first season, which I think I was actually expecting something more similar to the first season finale based on the way the penultimate episode ended. There was very much this kind of reminder of how the first season had ended with the ending of the penultimate episode where they brought us back to that moment of she's alive. And I think that was a promise that, hey, you thought that was an incredible finale, but wait to see what we've got for you next week. And I think it very much lived up to that while also staking its own ground. It was just as epic, and I think it was a really fitting conclusion for this part of the Severance story. Did you think so?
Honestly, it was so good. I was very tense. There were moments where I laughed a lot. There were moments where I was like, oh, that's a call to such and such film. We'll get there. There were moments in the performance from Tremel Tillman in particular where he's having this back and forth with a robotic version of Keir Egan, and the robotic version of Keir Egan kind of calls him out on, his big words. They're basically trying to dumb him down. There's so much here. I mean, every performance was out of this world. There were fan moments where, Zach Cherry's Dylan gave a call back to the finale of the first season by saying, you, Mr. Milchick, something I said at exactly the same time. I could see it coming out of him. Dylan is the hero at one point. Everyone seems to be on the same page. There's a lot of questions that I have, but can we rewind a moment? Because we end episode 9 with Mark Stout meeting Harmony Cabell with the fire blazing behind her, which I thought, well, this isn't going to end well. And, well, it didn't, but for different reasons.
Yeah, that conversation went very differently than the way I was expecting it to, but I adored the way that it ended up. First of all, the moment where Devon tells Mark S., don't run outside because he's just going to bring you back in. I thought that was just a really almost comedic revelation, but also sad in a way that Mark S. is trapped there. He doesn't have the ability to leave even if he wants to. But it devolves into this conversation between Mark and Mark S. over video that starts off so congenial, but quickly turns into a confrontation between two people with very different goals. I think we've often wondered, or at least I have, what it would be like for Mark and Mark S. to meet, because they are, they come from that same person, but they're such different sides, I think, of Mark, and kind of the experiences that they've had have just led them to such different places. And so they start off buddy-buddy, being kind to each other, getting a little bit more insight into the other's worldview. But then you realize, okay, these are two guys in love with different women, and they can't both get what they want. And so it ends up with them shouting at each other over this video camera, and they both kind of become defensive, or, maybe even go on the offensive to try to get what they want and argue for their own existence and happiness, right? Which is just an incredible thing that I don't think you could get from any other show. And the performance here from Adam Scott is just amazing. The way he portrays these two very different people having this conversation. and the way it was done technically with that camera, I think it could have become very repetitive or even hard to follow if you didn't do it quite right. But the way they shot it and portrayed it, it was so engaging. And as the argument heated up, I could feel it rising inside of me, not only my passion for both of these people, but also kind of the conflicting nature of it all of, yeah, these are two people with very good points, but they can't both be right. So where does that leave us?
Well, where it led us was Mark S. basically dictating, hey, get me into the severed floor. And that's really where the roller coaster of the show's finale begins, right?
Yeah, he says, if I don't wake up next on the severed floor, you're never going to see your wife again, which is a very dark threat to be coming from Mark, but I think it shows kind of the emotional state that he was in and the point that they had put him in, where he was trapped, having this conversation with someone he didn't want to, and his very existence was being put on the line. So what's at stake for Mark S. here? Not only is his love for Helly, but also the fact that if Mark gets what he wants, if he's able to help Gemma escape, then they can go off and live their lives and never think about Mark S. again. He might never wake up. And even the offer of integration that Mark offers him, Mark S. points out, okay, that's well and good for you. You get your memories back. You get to be reintegrated, but I'm going to be this tiny subset of your consciousness. Will I really even live on, right, if this reintegration works? And so I like that they kind of left that storyline open, and the question of reintegration really not being the fix-all that maybe we thought it was throughout this season, and really not being the resolution for Mark S. in any way. So he does end up on the severed floor, and through this conversation with Helly, he does ultimately decide that he's going to help Mark get Gemma out. But it really is this love between these two. It's unspoken. They never look each other in the eyes and profess their love for one another, but just the care that they show for one another throughout this very tense conversation, where Mark is at his desk literally finishing this file that could lead to the end of his existence and the existence of the person that he loves most, but she's pushing him to do it because it's his only real opportunity to live on, because she knows that once they get what they want out of him, Lumen is going to do away with him anyway. So she's willing to sacrifice her life in order for him to live on. Just the love between them, absolutely incredible. And the way that that's developed over the season, you know, from that kiss last season on the elevator, throughout everything that they've been through with Helena's deception, and Mark kind of falling for it and then pushing away and then coming back together. I think what it really led me to was just this recognition that these are two full human beings. These are fully formed human beings. These are people who really do care for each other and have rich lives. They're limited. They're not allowed to leave, the place that they work, but that doesn't make them any less human and any less people or a love story that I want to root for. And again, I think that leads us back to that conflicted nature that we're at the end of season 2, where, we want Mark to be with Gemma, but we also want Mark S. to be with Helly. And those two things just can't both happen. At least I can't see a way for them to. And that's kind of the tension that we're left with.
There's a really telling line in this finale that goes, they give us half a life and think we won't fight for it. And I thought that was really poignant and great storytelling and great writing, because in a lot of ways in the real world, workers think that a lot, right? Workers' rights, unions. There is an element to, the construct of the innie story that is very much mirrored to the outie story of millions of people, in the real world. And I thought that was really, really special. So, the goats. Let's go there. We've been wondering for so long what the mystery is behind the goats, why they're being bred. And, well, it's not as convoluted as we first thought.
Right. We still have so many questions about what exactly Lumen is doing down on the severed and testing floors. We find out quite a bit from Miss Cobell in this episode that what Mark has been doing with the macrodata refinement is creating innies for his wife. And once they get to that 25th innie, for some reason, that is the completion of the process, and they're going to achieve something. We don't know exactly what it is. But then there's been these goats this whole time. And they've been raising them on the severed floor. We've got to see, how many of them there are. There's a ton of them. They get to live in this kind of green pasture with the white ceiling. Very odd place for these goats to be living. But the question was always, okay, are these goats some kind of part of the severance process? Are we doing something with their consciousness or their bodies or cloning? I mean, there's all kinds of theories that people have. But it turns out that, at least based on the information we have from this episode, the goats are a part of ritual sacrifice for the Kier cult, that they're going to kill Gemma because her purpose has been completed, but they want this goat to be buried with her and accompany her to the afterlife somehow. And it's this very odd ritual that they have that it seems like just completely based in their myth, right? Based in their religious beliefs. It has nothing to do with the science of severance or what they're doing on the severed floor, at least from what I could gather. And I thought that was a really interesting way to take that mystery. I mean, I think it is a payoff, but do you think that's really all there is to the goats after all this time?
I think what it does really cleverly is it offers an element of weakness to this all-encompassing Lumen, their philosophy, their myth. For there to be a way to get one over Lumen, there has to be a weakness at some point introduced. And this is it, right? And it plays out that way with Drummond and this sacrifice being interrupted by Marquez inadvertently, because of course he's banging on another wall.
Yeah, and he tries to pretend like he's found the wrong door, but Drummond knows exactly, what's going on. And there seems to be this kind of disdain within Drummond for Ennis, or at least Mark S. specifically. We don't know a ton about him. And, of course, we do see his demise during this episode, which I think is unfortunate because I really want to know more about him. He seems like a very interesting character in the sense that he's a half sibling to Helly. He's, if not a secret child of the Egans, he's kind of like shifted off to the side. Anyway, he doesn't share the Egan name, but he does work for them and share in their purpose. And he's an important person within their organization, but he's not running the company, and he has no destiny in that sense. So I wish we could have spent more time with him and learned more about him. I thought that his performance and portrayal was just incredible. But yeah, that whole sequence between him and Mark where the ritual is interrupted, and that really does become kind of the turning point where we're not sure how Mark is going to pull off his plan. And it turns out it all kind of relies on Drummond and his ability to overpower him, or at least get the upper on him through a gun that somehow exists on the severed floor, which was also very bizarre to me.
I loved Mr. Drummond's demise, which Mark, who ends up pulling the trigger, has no idea because it happens during that transition in the elevator, which I was laughing so hard. I thought it was comedically just genius how that was put together, because there's also an element where Mark is brandishing the gun but just won't shoot the female scientist at Lumen, who's shouting whilst the gun's being pointed at her and running away.
She's like, I'm not doing this with you right now, I'm leaving. Like, she's just not taking, she's like, you're not going to shoot me, but I'm not going to stay here. And she just takes off. That was great. But that fight scene, I think, between Drummond and Mark S. was something we've never seen before. That violence, that whole element of it. In Severance, the violence has always been very understated or implied. Mm-hmm. It's like, with the Ennis, they have this natural kind of fear of the people who are over them, to the point that the violence is just threatened, and that's all that they need. But here we see, Mark S. and Drummond going all out, fighting for their lives with each other. And if you listen to the Severance podcast, Ben Stiller and Adam Scott actually talk about introducing this element to the show and how it was something they hadn't done before, and how it was actually even a challenge for the actors. Adam Scott didn't land quite right during one of the scenes where he was thrown against the wall and ended up kind of knocking the wind out of himself at one point. And that's actually the shot that they used. The violence was very brutal and not at all what we've come to expect from Severance. And then seeing Mark come out of the elevator with the blood all over him, it's just striking. And it leads into the final part of the episode as well. Of course, then we do get to see Mark find Gemma and get her out of the situation that she's in. I think the big tension there was, would she follow him out of the testing floor or out of the room that she's in, the Cold Harbor room, because she doesn't know him. But I think she knows something is wrong. And her final test as an innie is actually to take apart the baby crib from her home, from the child that she and Mark lost before. It's a huge part of their backstory. They're testing to see if that will trigger some kind of memory in her. So I was wondering if maybe the combination of the crib and seeing Mark would awaken her, and that's not the direction they went. So Severance is still holding. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that going forward. But they're able to escape. They share a kiss in the elevator that then Mark S. and Miss Casey wake up to. And Miss Casey has no idea what's happening. But I don't know. She looked like she might have been kind of okay with it, honestly. Either way, she follows along with Mark S. They run down to the end of the hallway to the stairwell. They're able to do so because, of course, Helly and Dylan are holding back Mr. Milchick, who they've trapped in the bathroom with the snack machine, which, just using the elements that you have available to you. That was very, very cool. But, of course, Gemma leaves. She enters the stairwell. She reawakens as herself. She looks back at who she thinks is her husband, but is actually, of course, his innie, Mark S., on the other side of the door to the stairwell. Just as Mark is trying to decide whether to go with Gemma or to stay, Helly appears behind him, calls to him, and he answers her call. He runs to her, and the two run off, not into the sunset, but down the hallway hand in hand.
And that final shot, everything leading up to it, I've seen many people mention this, but Brendan Bigley was the first that I saw, who really kind of echoed my thoughts from probably the Drummond fight scene all the way up to the finale. I kept thinking, this is the last third of The Graduate, which is fantastic, fantastic film. Highly, highly recommend everyone check out. That final runway scene where Helly and Mark are running away together was an ode to Logan's Run. And then the final freeze frame and zoom, all shot digitally and then processed on film to give the same aura that we got from episode 7. I'm going to say episode 7 with Gemma. Stylistically, very much the same. That freeze frame and then zoom in was very much like the final scene from The 400 Blows, which is part of the Criterion Collection. If you've not seen it, highly, highly recommend you do. Very old film. Fantastic. And honestly, the music even at the end, Windmills of Your Mind. It was the perfect crescendo. I think that final frame and that final scene is something that people are going to draw on for many generations to come. I truly believe that this is a special moment in TV and filmmaking that we got to witness. And they seem to come few and far between. We get so many prestige television series that are thrown at us almost on a weekly basis these days, whether it's from Apple or from elsewhere. But there aren't many that have an impact like this finale, and I'd say like this series as a whole. Just every element of storytelling and filmmaking within this season was just executed in a really, really special way. You even think about the artists behind the set dressing. You think about the amount of people it would have taken to pull off some of the shots that we've seen, especially in episode 9 with the cabling. Honestly, just a really, really well executed season that's worthy of many, many rewatches. And this is the other thing as well. I know they've said during conversations that some was by accident, and maybe, there is some kind of energy around this series that's helping everything come together. But you look at the details, if you rewatch season 1, you can see that the details marry up with what's to come. And Yeah, I can't heap enough praise on this, Devon. I talked a lot about Severance Season 1 when we did the podcast together a few years ago when that came out, and it was my duty to review pretty much by myself that time. I've really enjoyed watching the second season with you, and I cannot wait to see what a third season brings to it, because that is the news, isn't it? Severance Season 3. It's official. We could theorize as to what's to come, but I don't want to do that. I think the storytelling was so special in this second season that the theories very quickly slipped away, and I was just there for the ride.
I completely agree with you. It's fun to share the theories, and especially to see what other people are thinking, because sometimes it just goes way off base. There are a lot of people who think Rickon is a very, very important character in the series, and really want to see him come to the forefront. And maybe we'll see that in season 3. But I'm with you. I'm just along for the ride at this point. I'm loving this show. It's so special. I like what you said about feeling like we're in a moment in kind of television history, and that this is one that's going to be looked back on fondly for many years and decades to come, and probably studied as well for a future generation of TV and filmmakers. For me, I think this season had just a really tough job following up on the epic first season of Severance, but I think it handled it so well. It got back to a slower pace and really got us living in the world and those slow reveals, spending time with these characters, which I know was a struggle for some people to get back into after living with that cliffhanger for 3 years. But I think it fit with what the show delivered most for its first season. And it is so effective for the gradual storytelling that Severance excels at. All those little details that you pick up over time and then see play out. It's such a great payoff because we're spending time there. The season gave us plenty, but it also left us wanting more, which is why I'm so glad that we have the official third season renewal, as if that was even a question, right?
Sure.
I think the question now is how long it's going to take to make season 3, but I think hopefully the turnaround will be a lot quicker because there will be less roadblocks in the way. But this season, there were so many touching, quiet moments alongside the confusing oddball ones between all the incredible reveals. I just can't get enough. Bring on season 3. Loved the second season of Severance, and I can't say enough good things about it. The first 2 seasons of Severance are now streaming in full on Apple TV Plus with our fullest endorsement. If you haven't seen them yet, do check them out.
Let's talk about some TV app highlights before our Up Next picks this week. Films this week to check out. If you didn't have enough to watch already, A Complete Unknown makes its way to Hulu with Timothée Chalamet, who honestly I feel like could have been the perfect lead for Carême based on that trailer. Didn't happen. Queer is also coming to Max, starring Daniel Craig, directed by Luca Guadagnino. But we have some new films coming. Holland makes its way to Prime Video. It's a thriller starring Nicole Kidman as meticulous Nancy, a teacher and homemaker whose picture-perfect life with her community pillar husband and son in tulip-filled Holland, Michigan, tumbles into a twisted tale, with Nancy and her friendly colleague becoming suspicious of a secret only to discover nothing in their lives is what it seems. Bring Them Down makes its debut on Premium VOD, starring Barry Keoghan. The film follows the ongoing rivalry between farmers Michael and Jack as it suddenly escalates and triggers a chain of events that take increasingly violent and devastating turns, leaving both families permanently altered. And on Sunday, Mobland, a new series on Paramount Plus, sees the head of an organised crime family fighting for power within a global crime syndicate. It stars Tom Hardy, Helen Mirren and Pierce Brosnan. And Fountain of Youth director Guy Ritchie has directed a handful of episodes. Devon, the trailer looks absolutely superb. So lots and lots to watch. But if you're looking for something a little more classic, may I introduce to you the perfect companion for many, many reasons to the studio. And that is The Player from 1992, classic Robert Altman film starring Tim Robbins as Griffin Mill, a Hollywood producer who provides opportunities to screenwriters based on their scripts. But when he starts to receive anonymous death threats, he suspects a person he rejected. It's absolutely brilliant, Devon. I don't know if you've seen it, but the perfect accompanying piece for the studio this week. And occasionally you got to dip back into the classics and catch the references. Of course, Logan's Run, The Graduate. There's so many that we've mentioned just in this episode. So 400 Blows even. Lots and lots and lots to watch. So there we are.
Yeah, and I appreciate you putting together that list of all the references, because I have not seen The Player or some of those other classics. And so I appreciate you sharing those, and definitely worth adding to the list so you can catch those references the next time they come around. My pick this week is more current. It is on Disney Plus, surprising no one, and it's the streaming debut of Mufasa: The Lion King. This being the prequel to the live-action Lion King that came out a few years ago, this time centering on Mufasa, Simba's father, and his origin story. So this is kind of an original entry into the Lion King lore. Being a kid who grew up loving Lion King, I've always been fascinated by the way they continue to expand that world. You know, they had the direct-to-video sequel, Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, which introduced Simba's daughter. Then there's a show on Disney Junior, which introduces his son. This movie actually incorporates them as well in an interesting way, so it's contributing to the lore while also kind of affirming some of the things that I loved as a kid. And I can only hope that a live-action version of Simba's Pride is next. I would love to see them kind of complete that Lion King live-action story. I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. You wonder why Disney keeps making live-action remakes. It's because people like me keep watching them. I could watch this story portrayed any number of ways and keep loving it. I'm a huge fan of The Lion King, the music, the characters, and I'm excited to see this on streaming on Disney Plus today.
And, well, that brings us back full set. No, it doesn't. I was trying to think of a circle of life reference for funnies, but I couldn't do it, Devon. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed this week's episode of Magic Rays of Light, delving into the world of Apple TV. You can, of course, contact us on social media via the links in the show notes, and you can email the show or send us an iMessage with an audio message to magic@macstories.net. We'd love to hear from you.
We'll be back next week to recap Mythic Quest and explore some side quests. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.